Runt-Free continued to pace in his command warren, preening his fins and pulling off loose scales of excess lithium, hissing nervously. The fleet had won a decisive victory, managing to strike and disable many of the human shipyards in a rousing barrage just a week earlier. But even as he saw their munitions slam into the stations, Runt-Free could tell something was wrong. Their weaponry should have far outclassed the human defenses and armor, yet a barrage that should have melted the human platforms in a single volley took a dozen before they were finally battered into submission. Fortunately, the human weapons were much like those his warrior species had encountered across the rest of this arm of the galaxy. Energy-based lasers, plasma, some high-density metal mass drivers, and even a surprising but not devastating chemical explosive. His ships had weathered it with little concern, their shielding and armored plating, tombs of the glorious dead forming an impenetrable hide upon their ships, catching whatever their shields failed to repel. But then Runt-Free had begun to hear rumors. Word spread that the humans were planning a counterattack. Worse still were the whispers that the humans were certifiably insane, willing to plumb terrifying depths of desperation to improve their weapons. The transmissions from the Vanguard fleet had been brief, but warned that human weapons were different this time, effective to a terrifying degree beyond anything the fleet had encountered when defending their own shipyards. The commander of that vessel had been killed, may his bones rest peacefully, destroyed along with his ship before he could give further details. Runt-Free kept tight control over the message, lest it cause panic among the crew and staff of his command ship. A trill sounded at his door, and he responded for the visitor to enter. It was Prime 4, one of the senior officers and second in command of the vessel behind Runt-Free himself. He felt, not for the first time, a small bit of satisfaction that it was a Runt in charge of the vessel, and a Prime taking orders from one. He could tell it rankled the Prime somewhat, but Runt-Free had proven himself time and again in simulators and in actual combat. Thanks to the societal shift towards meritocracy in the military over the last generation, the Prime would just have to work all the harder to prove themselves worthy of future command. "Oh, Captain, my Captain," the Prime said, with a hint of stiffness that Runt-Free picked up on. "The sensors from our outward probes have detected hypervelocity bubbles approaching our orbit. The anticipation that the humans would seek to destroy our shipyards in turn appears to be correct." "Or so it would appear," he corrected them. "We do not know for certain that the humans don't have a secondary force in another system while our attention is occupied here. Be that as it may, though," he continued, "we shall ensure the Dullars are sent to meet whatever god they still cling to." The officer snapped a metallic arm in a crisp salute, before turning to return to the bridge. Runt-Free continued moving towards the bridge, running a sheathed claw along the walls of the vessel. It was one of the best ships they had, bristling with weapon batteries, nestled around a hyperbubble generator capable of taking them nearly halfway across the galaxy in a single jump. Armored and built from the finest, purest alloys their kind could produce, the ship was a fortress. The inner bones of the ship were, of course, prefabricated from metal mined from their planet itself. But the exterior hull armor was forged from the joining of tens of thousands of graves of warriors past, as was tradition. Their metal coffins and shining bodies that could turn away and deflect any barrages of lasers, explosions, or rail slugs that any enemy could muster. The first human ships were just exiting their hyperspace bubbles as Runt-Free reached the bridge. One of the external camera arrays zoomed in, enlarging the images. It was clear that the human ships had been retrofitted, and rather hastily. Many of the weapons appeared to be almost haphazardly welded and bolted on. But what concerned Runt-Free wasn't the weapons themselves, but what they contained. All of the ships bulged with countless thousands of metal bubbles. Tanks, if he was any judge. His sensor engineers were already working to penetrate the human's armor with long-range scans, but even from this distance, Runt-Free could see a telltale crisscross pattern across each of the tanks, something to his eye that looked like heating conduits. He ran for the possibilities of what the tanks could contain, that would be deemed useful enough as a weapon. Several ideas came to mind, though we discarded many of them, due to the fact that the humans evidently wanted to keep the tanks above the ambient freezing background temperature of space. "I suppose we'll get a better idea when they decide to use it," he muttered. The engineers reported that the first of the weapons was charging up. Runt 3 commanded the shields to be energized, phased to repel laser weaponry. If he was to hazard a guess, the tanks most likely contain chemicals, perhaps to help suffuse and augment a chemical laser. It was crude technology, but dangerously effective. If they were to hit an area with minimal shielding for an extended duration, the lasers would lose effectiveness as the fight progressed, and debris filled the combat zone. However, the initial barrages could be quite dangerous. With a hum, a faint green barrier appeared, suspended a few hundred meters away from the hull of the ship. The nearest human craft appeared ready to fire, and only a moment later, Runt 3 could see flashes of dust or debris coming from the muzzle of the weapon aimed at them. The projectile crossed the distance at a relatively leisurely pace compared to the near instantaneous barrage he had expected from a laser, and he realized it was a form of mass drive around. It was also much slower than he would have normally expected, and he was puzzled. Doing his best to keep concern from his voice, he commanded the crew to remodulate the shielding, this time against mass drivers. The shielding shifted slightly, changing to a green-blue hue, and an almost honeycomb-like pattern appeared on its surface. Runt 3 felt confident they would handle whatever the humans threw at them, until his heart dropped into his gut, as the first set of rounds punched almost entirely through their shielding, spattering and slamming into the hull. He could already hear alarms beginning to wail across various displays as he shouted, "How in the molten hell did that get through the shields?" "I'm not sure, sir, but I think the projectile is less dense than what the shields are calibrated for," an officer replied. Indeed, that seemed to explain the minimal damage they had sustained, as the armor had been damaged but not breached. "Well, what do they hit us with?" Runt 3 demanded. "Analysis is still processing, sir. Part of our sensor array was damaged in the impact, so it's taking longer than normal." "Well, regardless, they managed to slip through the shielding. Recalibrate the shields to reject lower density projectiles." "Sir, what if this is a bluff and they're going to send a regular rail round at us next?" "We'll have to trust that the armor of our fallen kin will be able to repel it, as it has many times before. In any case, I don't know if I trust these humans. I don't want to risk them hitting us with something even more—" Runt 3's words caught in his secondary jaw, as the ship rocked from a series of explosions. The first explosion had been a rumble, but it was almost immediately joined by dozens more, both large and small, nearly throwing Runt 3 to the ground. Declawing his way back up the side of his command perch, he began shouting orders, trying to inject calm and directness into the chaos engulfing the bridge. "What was that? Did they fire at us again?" "No, sir. It appears they are still recharging their weapon array," a technician replied, though their voice faltered. "I don't understand. The crystalline slug they fired at us, it seems the fragments are causing the explosions. The density was low enough to pass through our shielding, but—" "How would that have the capacity to detonate?" Runt 3 demanded. "No chemicals that low of mass would have been capable of exploding with such—" The words caught in Runt 3's throat as his eyes widened. There had been rumors about the bipedal aliens called humans, stories that they were born of a world of nightmares. He had dismissed it all as bunk, pure nonsense akin to calling the sun a holy being, rather than a ball of burning gas. The stories, he had believed, were just human propaganda, spread to make them seem more intimidating. But as he stumbled over to the scanning consoles, looking over the shoulder of the technician, dread began to rise from the base of his very fins. The analysis crept closer to completion, and all the terrifying rumors he had heard about humanity came rushing back. Rumors that their teeth dripped with venom, that their hands ended in claws that could gouge metal, that they could consume any other being that walked, crawled, flew, or swam. Of all these rumors, the one now materializing in front of him had been the least likely, the most fantastical and absurd. As the gentle click of completion registered on the console, Runt 3 saw the truth. The humans had fired a bolt, a crystallized bolt of almost pure solvent at them. The few impurities it contained appeared to be metallic, likely providing enough of a purchase for the magnetic acceleration coils to fire the crystal at their hull. But the solvent? The solvent was the cause of the explosions, consuming the very coffins and embalmed corpses of his fallen kin that formed their armor, using them as fuel for the blasts. The worst of the explosions finally seemed to dissipate, the force of the eruptions flinging most of the solvent back into space, yet Runt-Free still shuddered at how much damage had been inflicted. The rumors had been true. He had thought it was exaggeration when some had said that humans used solvent as if it were harmless, while any right-minded creature in the galaxy had a healthy respect for its danger. Still, Runt-Free breathed a shallow sigh of relief, urging his curling fins to calm. The shield modulations had been updated to account for the lower density projectiles, and the long-range scanners had managed to capture a better, enhanced image of the human weaponry. Sensor engineers reported that the power spikes they had detected had since dropped. Evidently, the humans had detected that Runt-Free's ship had modulated its shielding. However, another one of the humans' cobbled-together weapons was arming itself. From what they could sense, it appeared to be forming some sort of aggregate ball, deadly white-blue shards of solvent growing into a mass far too quickly for Runt-Free's liking, apparently favouring bulk over a purified and unified crystal. This weapon was staged on an odd oblong platform, something resembling a gravity rig used to haul heavy cargo. Gravity rigs were far too slow to be effective as a mass driver, but something about it told him that this was an intentional choice on the human's part. One of the navigation crew shouted, "They were accelerating towards us. They'll be close, but they're turning away from a direct ramming course." "Keep us at a healthy distance," Runt-Free barked in response. "And where the hell are our weapons arrays?" Their ship had been offering only a meager response, and unfortunately, the human vessel had turned in such a way that much of the return fire was being absorbed by non-critical parts of the hull, which lacked visible weapon, sensor, or engine components. Suddenly, the human's plot became crystal clear in Runt-Free's mind. "Helmsman, pull us about, full burn. Get us as far away from the humans as possible," he ordered. The helmsman complied, but the ship was sluggish, too slow. This burn should have been initiated seconds ago if they were to pull away to a safe distance. Runt-Free could see the looks of confusion from the other officers on the bridge. Prime 4 voiced the question aloud. "Oh, Captain, my Captain, why are we fleeing? We've already modulated the shielding against solvent. Another hypervelocity slug will shatter upon it." "They aren't firing it at us at high velocity," Runt-Free snapped back, forgoing any attempt to modulate the concern in his tone, or offer any placating gestures for his sudden retort. "They mean to hit us with that ball and ensure it sticks on the shield." Prime 4 still looked confused, and Runt-Free could only groan in frustration as the human weapon activated. The Globus solvent aggregate was lobbed slowly at them, no faster than a fighter craft could travel, but they were close enough now that it found its mark, splattering against the shield. The hexagonal grid flickered and held, and Runt-Free heard a chirp of relief from Prime 4, but he gritted his own jaws, knowing what was about to happen. The shields were well adapted to deflect and defend against high-energy weapons, but this was different. 10 times the mass, covering an area orders of magnitude wider. The solvent spread across the shield, and everywhere the crystalline aggregate stuck to it, the shield's energy was diverted. Unwillingly, the shield began to melt and then vaporize the solvent into clouds of rapidly diffusing gas. Presumably, the gas would refreeze into microcrystals, but the damage had already been done. The draw on the shields caused them to flicker and crackle. Power wardens began shouting warnings about the energy draw their sensors were registering. Runt-Free carefully considered his options. If the humans fired again, the solvent aggregate was likely to burst through the shields entirely, causing heinous damage to their ship, and to the fallen warriors who protected it. He had heard that humans were not a sadistic race, at least not compared to others his people had encountered. He hoped the humans on the frontier possessed some shred of honor. "Drop the shields," he commanded. "Are you sure?" Prime 4 asked, not even bothering with an honorific. If they fire on us with the shields down, we'll be destroyed. If they fire again with the shields up but so poorly maintained, we'll still be destroyed. At least this way we might have a fighting chance. Prime 4 made a motion of deference. Still, Runt 3 felt his entire body tighten with tension as he sat on his pedestal, waiting for the humans to make their move. Rather than a volley of lethal weapons fire, however, they saw the flicker and shine of a dozen or so small craft exiting the human carrier. He sensed relief radiating throughout the bridge crew, but there was little time to celebrate. Opening the ship-wide audio channel, he intoned, "Prepare to repel all warriors. Prepare to repel boarders." Runt 3 then leaned back, reciting battle mantras in his head, as he carefully checked his talons and the rigid serrations on his fins, ensuring they were sharp enough to represent himself well in the coming fight. Now there was nothing to do but wait. Finally, the ship rumbled again, this time from the impact of boarding craft smashing into their hull. Runt 3 monitored what he could from his command center, though the earlier barrages had severely hampered their onboard sensors and camera arrays. Static, smoke, fire, and the hissing remnants of solvent clung to their ship, further impairing their systems. But finally, Runt 3 saw them, the humans advancing in their ship. Small air tanks were strapped to their sides, and he vaguely recalled that the human atmosphere required a minimum amount of oxygen, similar to how his own species required a minimum level of argon to survive. He was taken aback by the armaments the enemies carried, though. Ever since their first known strikes against humans had been planned, he had immersed himself in studying human warfare and weaponry. Human weapons were typically chemical slug throwers called firearms, primitive, and while capable of inflicting some degree of damage, they were a weapon his species was well adapted to withstand. Their metal bodies and skin could absorb and dissipate such shots with ease. Humans had not widely adopted laser or railgun technology in hand-to-hand combat either, and those they had were not expected to be particularly effective against his kind. But what these humans were carrying was bizarrely different. There were a few smaller sidearms, but instead of the usual cool colours of black and silver metal, these were bright and garishly neon colours. The humans carried them with far too much ease for them to be made of anything other than lightweight polycarbonates. Their primary weapons were even more outlandish, large and bulky with bulging tanks. As Runt 3 watched, he saw a human at the front motioning their arm back and forth, apparently priming some sort of pressure system. He was at a loss for what the weapon could be, until he saw one of the humans discharge it. A stream of liquid fired across the room toward one of his warriors 15 meters away. The warrior had been about to raise their energy rifle, but as the liquid splattered against them, they screamed and convulsed, a cloud of smoke, sparks, and fire engulfing them. Runt 3 could feel the stunned silence of the crew behind him, and could see on the screens, just as they did, the horrifying realization that the humans had brought weapons filled with solvent aboard the ship itself. As the human boarding party crossed into another hallway, this one with a camera functioning at near-perfect efficiency, Runt 3 could see the humans' weapons were leaking, dripping solvent here and there, leaving sparks and smoke behind them as they walked. Using solvent not just as ship-based weaponry, but in handheld combat was recklessly suicidal, yet the humans seemed cavalier about it, marching down the corridor with little care. Watching carefully, Runt 3 even noticed some of the solvent splashing onto the humans themselves, but they appeared unconcerned and unaffected by it. "Captain, that hallway leads to the bridge," warned one of the technicians. "They are almost upon us." There was a rumbling, then a muffled blast as the door shook. Watching through the screen, though the camera was already heavily damaged, Runt 3 could make out one of the humans hefting a small bulbous pouch or ball with practiced ease. The human threw it directly at the door, and it splattered against it. A moment later, the door shook again with another explosion, evidently yet another weapon filled with the deadly solvent. After the third blast buckled the doors inward, the first human charged in. Prime 4 let loose a battle well and lunged forward. To Runt 3's surprise, Prime 4 successfully disarmed the human, cutting the support straps they had used to carry their solvent weapon, and battering it to the side without breaching its ammunition tanks. A few drops of the liquid splattered here and there, sparking and steaming against Prime 4's armored shell, but they managed to render the human defenseless in a moment. Before Runt-Free could shout a command to hold, Prime 4 lunged again, claws extended, raking a gash from shoulder to waist along the human's chest. The razor claws did their job well, shredding the fabric uniform and skin beneath. But then the human spilled some kind of crimson liquid from the injury, liquid that spattered against Prime 4. Staggering back in confusion, Prime 4 ignited, flames, smoke, and sparks engulfing them in a while of frustrated agony. At this, Runt-Free's mind was made up. He made a sign of submission and barked a command for the rest of the crew to surrender, keying the ship-wide voice command to ensure his will was heard and obeyed. The humans who followed the first were cautious, some rushing over to tend to their injured comrade, but they appeared to hold to their sense of honor, and while they still held their weapons cautiously, they began to take the British crew prisoner. It was a disastrous defeat, but he didn't much care. Runt-Free knew then that there was no hope of victory in such desperate straits, not against creatures who had solvent pumping through their very veins.